So one of the questions that we get asked quite common and quite often is, how do we get over the interview stage? I feel like for a lot of our listeners and a lot of people out there, the interview is the most daunting task that there is possibly in regards to the whole application process. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of interview skills, it's one of the sort of daunting, factors of interviews. And I think for most of the time, it's really about lack of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I get scared of interviews.
Yeah.
I had one last week, and it was one of the scariest moments that I guess ever faced, because I've never had an interview that was very corporate.
Mm-hmm.
Having six people on the panel, individuals on the panel, it really throws you off. And that's just normal. I think it's just a way of, again, preparing for that, because you never know how interviews can go. Either it can be really positive or it can be really negative. And saying that, it's how do you overcome them and how do you kind of overcome the barriers with interviews. But it's a great topic, I guess. We really need to see how do young people, individuals in the community, how do they get over these interviews?
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
what are the steps? So, yeah, that's a fantastic topic today.
Brilliant. So you mentioned that you had an interview earlier last week, was it? I believe it was last week, yeah. So in regards to that interview, obviously prior to that, you were doing your preparation, but I feel like one thing that's important to tell our listeners about is to make them aware that sometimes overthinking can also become a problem, because I remember a few days before your interview, me and you sat together and you're like, I'm stressing about this, I'm stressing about that.
Yeah.
But I feel like it was very important just to calm your nerves down and just to be prepared and give it your best.
Yeah, definitely. I think with interviews in itself, with myself, my personal, I guess, experience is I prepare more than I should. And sometimes preparing a lot can become quite, in the interview process or actually on the day, it sort of looks like you've rehearsed you've rehearsed everything. And it's
sounding very robotic.
Yeah, sounding very robotic. But yeah, exactly. And sometimes I try to come across as genuine, and the employer thinks, oh, well, you've read that off our website and you're just sort of repeating that. Mm-hmm. And like I said, over-preparing sometimes can be, an issue. Other times it's obviously not researching enough. But in this case, because it was a company I knew really well and I knew the colleagues, and I thought, okay, I'll prepare as much as I can. I probably will get the job. But yeah, it is, again, lack of awareness, I kind of assumed that I would get the job, and assuming sometimes is not the best thing to do. And when it comes to interviews, you gotta be real, you gotta be realistic. Prepare yourself, know the outcomes. What are the outcomes? How are they going to sort of interview you in terms of what kind of industry are you looking at? And then presenting yourself in that industry.
Definitely.
It all depends, like I said, on where you're going for your interview. I wore a suit, and when I went there, I thought, okay, this might be slightly overkill,
Yeah.
I think, oh, no, why has he wore a suit in this interview?
Yeah.
And I felt like it should have been more smart cash. So sometimes, it's all sort of, for me, it's psychological. So how I dress, how I look in terms of in the interview and how I sort of present myself. Others, it's more about the research and what they sort of have in front of them. But for me, it's a psychological thing. So yeah, I think maybe I had a bit of, like I said, overkill on the suit, but it doesn't matter. That's just just me,
Yeah, you look all right in a suit though. So that's the main thing. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to ask you is, in regards to interviews, obviously that's something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people, especially in our employability workshops, that one of the biggest questions that seems to come up is, how do we deal with an interview? And we do a lot of mock interviews on a day-to-day basis. So it's almost like, what would you say are the common faults that you find in mock interviews when we do them with especially our younger listeners?
I think a lot of them, again, it's choice of language, choice of words that they use. Yeah, that's quite common. So using things like, you get me, and it's really informal language. When it comes to an actual interview, you have to be, you have to use the lingo that you are adapting, again, to the industry. So using the lingo that links to the industry, that's what you should be doing. But young people and individuals are, have never actually went into an interview process, will use, you'd be surprised at the sort of words they kind of use. Again, I think also their presentation, so the body language, slouching like this, and it's no eye contact. Again, really short answers that don't really
resonate to the job.
Resonate to the job, or even answering the question. So I know they sound quite minor, but again, in an interview, they become quite enhanced. So
I definitely agree with that. So one thing that I feel like has the fear, that people fear is as if they're being judged at that moment in time. Yeah. But I feel like what a lot of people don't understand about a job interview is something that I've sort of grasped and understood, is a job interview is not only for the employers to find out what you're about, but it's an opportunity to find out whether you're going to be a good fit for that company as well. So if you look at it in that way, you're both helping each other. With that interview, yes, you are the one that's going to be answering the questions. I'm not going to deny that. And it's quite daunting if you've never done it before, if you've not prepared, definitely. But at the same time, when you get, usually most interview questions towards the end, they will ask you, have you got any questions for us? And I feel like in terms of those questions, it's key to ask them those questions, those important questions, especially around, can you tell me a little bit more about the company values, and to see if they align with yourself? Because that's your opportunity to say, is this company that I've applied for, on paper, it looks amazing, but in reality, is it? Yeah. What's the work ethic like? What's the workforce like? What are the characteristics of employees? What's a star employee look like? What does my day-to-day look like? These are all important questions that we need to be asking at the end of interviews, just to show that, yes, we've done all the research and initiative based on theory, because everything on their website and everything like that is all on there. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's very important to understand what the company is actually about and what your job entails, because it might say one thing on the website, but on a day-to-day basis, it's something completely different. So you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you're doing an interview, you're desperate for a job and you're willing to take anything on, because that sort of puts you in a position, I guess, where you will take the job on and then you're not going to like what you're doing, and that will result in you wanting to apply to other jobs straight away.
Definitely, I think it's a two-way street, almost instantaneously when you go into an interview. You're applying, obviously, for the job because you need a job and you possibly might want to work there. Other times it's, out of desperation, sometimes you need that job, and it's a two-way street. In an interview, it should be, an open conversation about what is expected in that job, what is expected of the role itself. And was there someone before me that, had certain experiences that I don't have or I do have, and how I could sort of align with that. Yeah, definitely. But these are all open discussions, and it should be a two-way street. When it comes to an interview, don't think of this as, it's all about the employer. It's about you as well. And like you said, are you the right fit for that role?
Definitely.
So it's very important to, have that understanding of, you've come for this job. You would like to get this job as an offer, but also think about, are you actually ready for this job? Think about what your expectations, because employers will always ask, what are your expectations for this role? And it's not things like, I want to get paid a large salary, or I want to, how do I progress to the top to become a CEO? That's not the sort of questions. I'm talking, like you said, what is expected of me in my time in this role? How long do I have to work in this role for me to then progress to the next, promotion level? Or it could be, are there any sort of projects that I could be a part of? Yeah. But it's these questions that should be asked in an interview, and these are questions that should be encouraged as well. And from employers' perspective, it's, how do you get people to feel more comfortable in an interview?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I know we've jumped straight towards the sort of end of an interview, but let's think about some of the questions, the general questions that get asked in interviews. First and foremost, I think it's very important to say that the person who meets you for the first time within an organisation is probably one of the key influencers who deals, even though you might think that, okay, that person's just a receptionist, and that's, no disregard to receptionists whatsoever, but even that one person that you have the first interaction with, they have a massive influence on the business. Even though they're not the actual ones interviewing you, they're just showing you around. But at some point, what a lot of people don't know is the interviewers will go to them and ask them, what did you think about this person? Yeah. On their first impression. Yeah. So don't disregard anyone when you first walk into an office. That would definitely be my advice before you even get into the interview. I believe once we're in the interview, the next question that they tend to ask, which a lot of people struggle with, and we've seen that within our CareersGo workshops as well, is that they will say, when the question's asked is, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Obviously, we do something where we do the 30-second elevator pitch to help people to master that skill in order to be able to explain who they are in 30 seconds and quite clearly. That's something that we help them build on. But what would be your advice to people who ask that question? Because that question does throw a lot of people off. Because at that moment, once it's like, tell me a little bit about yourself, it's almost a case of,
what do I say? Yeah.
And that's the first point of hesitation. It becomes an issue, and people really struggle with that question. So, what would be your advice on that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of the introduction to yourself, it's almost a 30-second elevator pitch, or in other words, a window to who you are and what you've been currently doing. I think the first thing at most is to be genuine. Be genuine. Tell them about your actual experience that you're currently doing. If you have never got a job, if you have never had a job, then it's all about, how do you sort of introduce yourself in terms of your sort of softer skills. So currently I'm working as, I'm currently a student, and this is what I'm doing at the moment. I'd like to get offered this job, and so on. So it's about, being genuine. It's about having the right sort of questions as well. But also just in general, just giving them a sort of overview of you. And it's not really about your corporate experience or your job experience. It's about you as a person. Definitely. And they're really looking for just softer skills. Yeah. At that point, it's all about, okay, why are you applying for this job? Are you just tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of who you are, rather than what's on the job description.
Brilliant. Okay, so just in regards to some of the questions that we have sort of received, Arbaz, what would you say is probably the weakest answers that you've heard people say? Because I feel like it's important for us to understand what goes wrong in that question.
I think a lot of people just say, look, hi, my name's Arbaz, and I have worked at so-and-so, and this is why I want the job. Yeah. And it's almost like instantaneously, like I said, they've not described who they are, what kind of key skills do they have. And again, that 30-second elevator pitch, or that 30-second tell me about yourself, it's a make it or break it.
Definitely.
And like you said, that's the first impression.
But for a lot of people, I feel personally, and obviously we've done a lot of mock interviews between me and you, a lot of people feel like that is almost an icebreaker question, but it's not really, is it? A lot of people tend to feel that that's the sort of icebreaker question, so the interviewer gets to know the individual. Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that. Yes, it is a little bit of an icebreaker, but at the same time, they're trying to grasp who you are as an individual in a very short period of time, in that very short question. Again, you don't want to oversell yourself. You don't want to promise them the world, even though you're not capable of half the things. But nonetheless, it's important for you to get your idea across, and just to really make sure that people know who you are. So if it was me that was applying for a job, I'd say, my name is Shahid. I currently work as a teacher in FE, which is further education. My qualifications are whatever my qualifications are. This is what I aspire to do, and the reason I applied for this job is this. This is the reason I'm applying for this job. So I think those sort of questions, it's about the strong start, because at that moment in time, if you start that conversation in a very nervous way, or you don't have eye contact with the individuals, I feel like at that point, the interview's already not gone very well for you. Yeah. And it comes down to that saying as well, that first impressions are key, because it's important, especially for the interviewer, to understand who you are, because that's the first time. I mean, in some instances, based on your dressing and the way you've walked into the interview room, they know, and they as much as we say we don't, we all do. We make a prejudgment. We make a prejudgment of someone just by the way they walk into a room. And I know everyone will usually say, no, I don't do that, but the reality is you do. And it's a fact of human nature. We all do it subconsciously as well. I'm not saying it's a conscious act that we do, not out of malice, but there's always an aspect of it. I'd definitely say so. They've seen who you are once you've walked in through the door, but if they've not got a good first impression from when you walk in, then the first time you have a conversation with them, I feel like is the second opportunity for you to really nail what you're trying to get, what you're trying to say, who you are, and really project. Because you might have walked in and, I don't know, you tripped over a chair. I mean, stuff happens, and that doesn't give a positive. It shows your nerves, but at the same time, nerves is a good thing. Being nervous about something, for me personally, it tells me that you want something.
Yeah.
If you're not nervous about it, you probably don't want it as much as you think you do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, nerves are a good thing because sometimes it shows that you care.
Yeah.
And to the employer, it's all about, do you care for the role that you've applied for,
Mm-hmm.
and have you done your research? But more so, do you care about, the company? Do you care about the values of this organization?
Yeah.
But first impression is key, and like you said, you could trip over a chair, and sometimes that can throw you off completely. But it's all about controlling your nerves, preparing for the worst, but also, having that sort of awareness of the questions they're going to ask you. An awareness, sometimes for me, it's, again, maybe, having a sort of, I guess, a thought about what sort of room you're going to be in, and you're looking at you're Googling the type of building that you're going to, and sort of planning your journey to that interview. It's all, again, like a psychological thing that you kind of just do, and it's almost you're trying to paint a picture before you go in there. For me, that helps to paint a picture of who I think I'm going to be interviewed by. So obviously we'll go into that topic of how do you prepare. But for me, it's sort of visualizing all of this, and then going into the interview room, so that I'm able to kind of be more confident and overcome them sort of barriers.
Definitely. So just in regards to our learners, if there are any questions that you guys have, feel free to contact the studio line, which is on 0116 4822 086. Or alternatively, you can WhatsApp in at FMO, so Radio Ramadan on 077 4855 So if you have any questions, burning questions that you want to ask us, feel free to ask away. But moving on from that, so in terms of the interview, the next sort of questions that you get asked is, the first one is, as we discussed earlier, is, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Following on from that, the next question that they seem to ask is, can you explain a situation when you had to deal with a difficult situation and how you resolved it? What process do you take to answer those sorts of questions? Because those could be tricky.
Yeah, definitely very, very difficult question. But again, if you prepare, you can get over it. And what we do now in sort of our workshops, again, with learners or attendees in general, we show them the STAR method. Okay. And this is a method that's, it's every employer sort of promotes when it comes to the interview process and the structures for your responses. Some companies tell you to, research the questions and prepare the STAR method before you even enter. Some won't tell you. And the companies that don't tell you are the ones that are sort of looking for the STAR method more than any others.
So what is the STAR method?
The STAR method is, it's represented as situation, task, action, and result. So in terms of situation, what sort of situation were you in terms of what is it that you need to do, and what were you doing? In that sense, the task is how. In terms of your responsibility, what have you done? And the action is, what did you do in terms of resolving that situation and, flowing it through into the response. And the response is, after you've dealt with this situation, task, and the action you've taken, how have, what's been the outcome? How have people responded?
What's the resolution?
What's the resolution? So it is tricky even right now to explain it. It's quite difficult. But on paper, it's almost as if you can find, thousands of examples. But if you structure it to the STAR method, you're most likely going to be able to respond to sort of any sort of scenario-based question.
But I also feel it's also important for the interviewee to be able to recognise that they're actually being asked a STAR question, because they can be disguised in many ways. It can be like, tell me about a time you've had a disagreement with your manager and how did you resolve that? Tell me a time where you've had to deal with a difficult situation. How did you overcome that? So you've got a few different questions that they ask where they want you to use a STAR method. But a lot of the time, some companies will tell you, you need to use the STAR method to answer this question. But a lot of companies won't.
No.
And I feel like it's very important for the interviewee to be able to recognise exactly what the question is and what it's asking. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of the process and actually answering the questions, it's structuring it and using the STAR method can support any sort of response. It's again being natural in your response and the examples you use. Like I said, if it was a question around, oh, can you tell me an example of if there was a disagreement with your manager, can you give me an example of what you've done and things like that. Again, not being vulgar about your manager, instead you're meant to sort of resolve the situation how you've been professional. And it's having professional responses to them questions rather than, coming up with an example where it's almost as if you are dissing your previous company that you work for. So these are the things I think that are important when it comes to responses. It's to be genuine, it's to be respective, to the employer, and it should be natural to what you've actually applied for. So it should relate.
I also feel at that point you've also got to be very, very truthful in terms of your commitment and who you are and what you can sort of do and what your achievements are. Because you never know, down the line in terms of that job, if you do get that job at the end of it, they might think, okay, but this person knows how to do this, this, and this because they said in the interview that they know how to do this. Now, if it's a small company that you work for, usually your interviewee, the person that's interviewing you, will almost be part of your team. So you've got to be very careful in terms of what you're saying because some bigger companies, like companies that we worked for in the past, like Hastings, for example, you'll get an interview, but the person who did the hiring and you'll never see him again. You hardly ever see him again. You might see him around the office here and there, but realistically, your team is completely different to the person who has interviewed you because there's a specific team who interviews you. But even our jobs right now, like the person who interviewed me is actually my line manager. Yeah. So it's like you've got to be very careful in terms of what you say. You've got to be honest. You've got to be honest in terms of what you say because you might meet these people the day you start, and it's important for them to know who you're about. But just moving on a little bit in regards to the sort of interview, what sort of things do we think that it is that the interviewers, the people that are doing the interviews, are looking for? So obviously we've talked a little bit about relevant experience. They're going to have a look at what sort of experience you have in terms of the job. So obviously the job will come with the job description and a job specification. And alongside those, it's about what relevant experience or what relevant skills do you have for that job. But what else do you think they'll sort of be looking for?
I think this is, I guess, another thing I'll introduce is it's almost due diligence on social media.
Definitely.
So employers are, looking at, social media accounts all the time. And especially if you're getting hired for a role that requires you to work with, certain individuals or, you're overseeing a certain project, they need to know that you are the right person. And a lot of companies now, especially with, social media having a larger impact on people, there's a lot more posts, a lot more, awareness of this. So one of the things employers do is, they research people on social media, looking at LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and looking at the sort of posts people also put out there. This is something employers do because they want to know, like I said, they're doing their due diligence, and it's important to be aware of what you post online, and that all relates back to the interview process. You may not get hired because of the fact there's a certain post online, and it's being aware of what you're posting that can come back around and sort of, I guess, haunt you if there is things on there that you shouldn't be posting. And let's say you were to get an interview and you are the right person for the role, and then it all came down to that factor that they didn't want you because of that social media post. So it's being aware of employers doing their due diligence on you.
Definitely.
And that's solely based on just applying for a role, and they will do that. There's no doubt. Especially the larger companies that are really into their brand awareness. It's all down to how they sort of have their sort of brand image, and the people that work for them are the right people for them. So due diligence is something that's not really introduced as yet, but it's something that's becoming a larger impact on individuals when in an interview.
As we're moving on, and as we're talking about it on the topic, one thing that you mentioned was about LinkedIn. Now I know for a fact that a lot of the people that come in through our doors who ask us for help, the first thing we'll check is their LinkedIn profile to see what they're about. Okay. Now I know for us, we're not actually their employers. We're not employing them. but nonetheless, we still try to build a picture of who these people are based on their LinkedIn profiles. So let's just touch a little bit upon that. So in regards to LinkedIn profiles, why is it important to have a good LinkedIn profile? What is LinkedIn?
So LinkedIn is, a platform that you can network professionally on, and it's all about, again, knowing the people in the industry, networking with them to see the opportunities out there for you. But it all links back to, how you're presented on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn plays, again, a large factor. If you have a good LinkedIn page, I am sure there's a lot more employers that you can connect with and so on. And it's all about, it's almost as networking web. And for me personally, having a good LinkedIn profile enables you to, go further in terms of your promotion for your business, promotion for jobs, or if you're looking for a job, the more you connect with people on there, the better your chances of you might come across someone that's a hiring manager for a specific role that you're looking for. But LinkedIn, it's very important. It's I call it the digital CV. And that's what it is. It's a digital CV.
Times are moving now, and we need to really focus on. We need to focus on, yes, majority of people will be pen to paper, what does our CV say? But what they don't realize is a lot of people, if you want to know about someone, you're going to go on their LinkedIn profile. You're going to check who they are at. You're going to understand their employability, where they were employed, where they went to school, where they went to university. All of these things come up in your LinkedIn, and I feel like it's very, very important. So we've just been asked a question. So giving a little bit of advice on group interviews as a shy person. So look, at the end of the day, in an interview, when it comes, if you are a particularly timid individual and that's something that you struggle with, the first thing I would recommend is to read the room and understand your position within the room. Is something that's very, very important. You've got to understand where you stand. And look, just because the person's the loudest in the room doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're talking about. Okay, but one thing I would say to the people who are a bit timid, who are a bit quiet, is definitely voice your opinions. Don't get put in the sort of background, and don't disappear into the background, because the employers want to know who you are. It's your opportunity to tell them what you are, and especially if you are quite a timid individual, I feel like it's almost about bringing out that confidence, because this job for you is a new opportunity as well.
Yeah.
So it's about really helping yourself. But again, going back to our last week, I feel like in terms of the shyer people, it's important for them to be able to rehearse, prepare, and be confident within themselves. And I know that's something that's easier said than done. Building confidence is something that comes from hard work and dedication from yourself. It's nothing that someone else will help you with in terms of your confidence levels. I feel like it's something that you need to deal with yourself.
Yeah.
But saying that, it's not impossible. Like I said, the loudest person in the room is not always the most knowledgeable person in the room. Just because they're able to over speak you doesn't mean they're right in what they say.
No, and another good example is if you watch The Apprentice. This is just an example here because I'm just again thinking. The Apprentice, if you watch it, you see there's loads of group tasks that professional individuals do every week, and you'll see they'll always ask, "Oh, so what have you done, this week?" And relating it back to group interviews, it's almost like in a group project. If they're not sort of giving the input, no matter what, if the input's not there, you'll get fired. And it's the same thing. To be shy in a group interview can sometimes, again, it's not a good thing. Because you got, like I said, you'll be shy, but when it comes to the question, you need to respond no matter how little your input is. If you can have an input in that interview,
definitely
you'll be able to
definitely. So it's in regards to that. So we have different characteristics, I should say. So in regards to that, a lot of people, so you might be shy or timid. That's your personality. I understand that. However, do you have the knowledge? If you have the relevant skills and the relevant attributes that you feel can really help you to move forward with that, then I feel you should showcase that, definitely.
Yeah.
If it's, for example, if it's a law job that you're going for, if you have the legal knowledge and the legal expertise and you know what you're talking about, then what use are you if you're going to sit there in the background? You'd rather be upfront and honest and say, I'm this person, I know this, I understand that. And it makes it simpler for everyone to understand who you are and what your capabilities are, because even those timid people, they manage to get jobs within a company that aligns with them, which is important. if you feel like from the interview you're the most
Spoken,
you're the least spoken person, then take it as a reflection on yourself and better yourself for the next interview, because there will be other opportunities for you. So don't be put off if one interview doesn't happen because on that day you felt particularly shy. Maybe it was you had a person with a big personality in the room that was doing the group interview with you, and as a result of that, it sort of put you in the back foot.
And to touch on that, in terms of group interviews, it's the same thing. I've done group interviews on Teams. This is when I first sort of graduated and I was applying for roles. An example I can give you, there was a group interview on Teams, and there was around 23 different sort of individuals on there that all were sort of in sort of their professional life somewhere. And I felt like, their experiences were way better than mine. But at the end, out of the 23, I came out in the top 5.
Yeah.
To be considered for that role. And overall, I thought,
sorry, Albert. Was that because you were the loudest person in the room and you were talking the most?
Probably not. At that point, I think I was quite shy. However, when it came to me, when they asked, okay, because can you give an example? And I had all that time to think about how I could be different. And I said something like, in my spare time, I like to, make YouTube videos or something. It was quite stupid, I'll be honest, in terms of an example, but it left a mark on them to say, okay, so what do you do on YouTube? And I create content, etc. They're like, okay, so what kind of content? Oh, I like to, at that time it was making music, whatever it was. It could be anything, but it was just being different rather than saying, in my spare time, I like to go out and, it's a very much a corporate example they give.
Definitely.
And it's something different. And that led me on to, going into that whole process for out of 23 and becoming the top 5. I didn't get the job at the end. Yep. However, the experience to say, I got into the top 5 without any prior experience of having sort of this, very professional job. I always worked in retail at that point. So my background was sales. But it's again, how do you relate that back and how do you sort of put that story forward to the employer? And in a group interview, it's almost instantaneously as if what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's how you sort of display yourself to that employer, and it's again around knowing the skills that you have, knowing how you can be different,
definitely,
and just sort of being confident in your answer rather than being confident in the group at that time. Talking to people, it can be hard, but when it comes to them asking you a question, you got to be confident in that.
Definitely. So confidence is a big thing. Confidence is something that I feel like both of us, we touch upon it almost every week.
Yeah.
Because in reality, when it comes to job interviews and stuff like that, confidence is something that we take for granted at times. I have to say, alhamdulillah, both of us, me and you, like we're fairly quite confident two individuals. We're not afraid of the setting that we're in. We know how to control a conversation. We know how to have a conversation. We know how to deal with issues, in a very professional manner. So this is something that comes quite naturally for us, but obviously there's times for both of us, as we're growing up to get to this stage. It wasn't an overnight thing.
No.
I don't think it was a case of one day I woke up and that's it. I just had confidence and that's what it was. I mean, at some point in our lives, we've had our confidence knocked as well. Like when you don't get a job interview and when you're almost convinced that you're going to get the job and you don't get it, you kind of lose a little bit about yourself saying, oh, I did this wrong and I did that wrong and what could I have done better?
Yeah.
But in reality, you might have just had slightly less experience than the person who had, or they were looking for something specific in terms of their applicant and you just weren't that fit. But I feel like in terms of interviews, it's very, very important for you to ask for your feedback.
Yes.
If you don't get a job, it's not the end of the line.
No.
Look at you either win or you learn, and I feel like that's something that's very important for us to understand. You're not going to win at everything. Okay? We don't live in a fairy tale world, unfortunately. Okay, but in reality, once you get to that stage, and you might not get the job, and they'll say, "Sorry, you were unsuccessful at this time," and you've gone to the interview, always ask for feedback.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I was speaking to an employer not long ago. And it came down to say, I asked them, so what do you guys do if you reject all these, candidates that are maybe not that suitable? How do you handle that? And a lot of them say, we would still offer them a job or a role or consider them to be re-interviewed if they only asked why. after that email gets sent to say you've been unsuccessful in this role due to lack of experience or something like that, or there's they'll give a generic answer to say there's been so many candidates that have applied for this role, and unfortunately due to that volume of high content candidates, you've not been successful.
Definitely.
But the question the employer said, if only any of these sort of rejected candidates were to reply back and say, why, can you give me feedback, and is there any chance of being considered for another role?
Yeah.
And it's going out your way to do that. And
Definitely.
sometimes that is a tactic that employers want to see if, are these candidates actually serious about this job, and would they want to be considered again? And it's that, being confident in saying why, and like I said, asking for feedback.
Yeah.
That's what the employer said. If they could just reply back on an email, say, look, hi, I applied for this role. Can you give me feedback? And what did I lack in this that I was unsuccessful in? So it's being cautious. It's being aware of, why have you said no to me? And,
Definitely.
and it's going out your comfort zone to ask and challenge that employer, because there's no wrong in challenging as well.
I personally feel like our younger listeners will tend to struggle for asking about criticism. Because it almost feels like a personal attack on them at times. But it's important to understand that the feedback that you get given, be it from the interviewer, be it from a friend or a family, any form of criticism is important. It helps you to rise, to understand your faults, to understand your mistakes, to understand where you've gone wrong. And at the end of the day, life is one long journey where we're continuously improving ourselves. It's every week. No 2 weeks are going to be the same, because you're continually trying to improve what you do and what you're capable of. And I feel like for our younger listeners in particular, it's important for us to tell you that when someone criticizes, it's not a negative.
No.
Sometimes they're criticizing you because they want to see the best in you, because they might have said, okay, you weren't quite strong here on this thing. And for you in your head, you'd be like, no, but I did everything fine and it was all good, and why are you blaming me? But in reality, if you take that on board and be like, okay, this person didn't think I was strong, fair enough, let's move on. How can I be better? How do I better myself? When I go to the next interview, what am I going to do differently to improve myself? So I feel like the feedback is something that's very important in an interview, because you don't get every job you apply for.
No.
And if me and you sat here saying to our listeners that we've got every single job that we've applied for, we'd be lying, because it's the harsh world out there. We live in a world that's a very competitive environment. Any job you go for is a competitive environment.
Yeah.
But going back to what you said earlier, it's very important for people to understand that it's you and your uniqueness that is what gets you the job. A lot of times, people have asked us, especially in regards to CareersGo, that what's special about you guys and why, what's your USP, so your unique selling point. And in reality, we answer that question with, well, it's me and Arbaz, because it's what we bring to the table, the level of energy we bring in, and sometimes it's you're the difference that a lot of employees want. They want to understand that you're the change that they needed. Mm-hmm. So like I say, we both work in further education at the moment. There are some processes which are quite backdated, and I've come in as a fresh perspective who prior never taught before, but I've brought a lot of new perspectives, a new way of dealing with situations. And sometimes that's what a company wants. Sometimes they want you. They don't want the salary that's attached to you. They want you as an individual to be able to do what you want. Now, just going a little bit about something about your role that you do now, as it stands. Okay, your role was essentially created for you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of what you do on a day to day. So even though it was like at the time the college that you work at obviously focused around you and what your capabilities were, and they didn't want to lose you. So you already had a job there, but it was about how to enhance you to become more successful. And as a result of it, the college actually provided you with a specific role which is tailored to you realistically, and what you do, which is something that's amazing. So it goes back to, sometimes you don't get the interviews that you want, but sometimes they might say, okay, you weren't quite right for this job, however, we think you're important
for this,
for another project that we've got planned. And it's happened so many times. So even in some of my jobs that I've had them say, unfortunately, you weren't successful in this time. And when I've gone and asked them the feedback, saying why, what's the reason I wasn't successful? I want to know. I want to learn from it. They'll say, honestly, your interview was bang on. We were happy with the interview. It was just, obviously, there's too many candidates or people with more experience. And at the time, I was 18, 19, you know, just coming out the ranks sort of thing, trying to get a job, trying to work. But in those times as well, when I had those setbacks, the thing that I always focused on was these employers are saying that your interviews are great. So I know my interview skills are fairly all right. So it's not something I need to improve on. But what I did need to improve on was my skills and showing that I'm compared to the people who are 23, 24, 25, going up to 30, who were also interviewing for the same job as me, the thing that I didn't have to them was experience. And then it was about, right, how do I get myself that relevant experience? So you go out, you volunteer, you do work in your charity. A lot of us have friends and family who own businesses, especially here in Leicester. Everyone knows someone who owns a business. So ask them for some work experience. Really build your portfolio, because when you outshine someone else in terms of what you're capable of, I feel like that's something that's very important. I'm very lucky and very fortunate that I've worked with a lot of charities in and around Leicester. The mosque I go to is Dar Arqam, which really helps and supports in the community with charity work as well. So I've also been helping them out with a few projects wherever I can. So it's almost building those skills and helping people to see that you're not just a very robotic person. There's more substance to you than just sitting at home.
And interestingly, going on to that, this is a question that came up yesterday when I was teaching students at the college, and we were looking at interview skills, and it was along the lines of, so what barriers would you face as an individual, especially young people in the era of interviews now? Mm-hmm. And straight away someone said AI. And I said, okay, what about AI? And then I had to kind of, again, dig deeper. And in terms of AI, they said, with every sort of with every interview that I prepare for, mm-hmm. And I use AI, the responses are always the same.
I agree with that.
Straight away, I was like, okay, so hands up here, who uses AI to prepare for anything in life?
I guess that was majority of the class there, yeah.
And it's like, okay, so if you went for an interview and you all had the same responses, what would happen? And they go, most likely all of us would, it look as if we're cheating,
yeah,
or straight away it look as if you're no different to that person that I've just interviewed.
Literally.
And it all comes down to again having that unique selling point. I know AI is great for structure; it's great to support in the sense Definitely. Of your thought process or preparation. But again, tailoring the responses to you as an individual is very much different.
So one thing that I think, just to talk upon there, so a lot of my students will tend to use AI, and a lot of the time, it's not a case that they've used AI that I have an issue with. Well, in terms of the academic malpractice that comes alongside that, obviously that's definitely an issue. But nonetheless, like, using AI is not the issue.
No,
it's about how to use AI effectively. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's good to help you structure your answers. So if you're struggling with a STAR method, you can tell ChatGPT is one of the ones that I use. So you can talk to it and say to it, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, I'm applying for this job. And from there, it'll give you an answer based on it. But the answer is going to be a very, very generic answer according to every individual that's possibly applied for a job like that. However, it's up to you to tailor that to you. And that's what a lot of our learners in college and a lot of our listeners fail to do, because they've got the answer in ChatGPT. It's an easy way out.
Yeah.
But what they don't realize is their employers are also up to date with AI.
Yeah.
And they know what a generic answer sounds like, and they can pick that up. We can pick that up in our interviews. We know which one of our CareersGo learners come through and they've used ChatGPT. We can almost, it's like a sixth sense. You know it's there. You know they've used it, and especially when it's rehearsed, you can pick that up straight away. So I think next week what we're going to do is we'll have a little bit of a discussion about AI in particular, and how to use it effectively, especially in regards to employability and in the workplace. Because let's not kid ourselves. AI is brilliant. Used in the right way, it's a brilliant tool. If not, it makes you become less reliant on certain things. So, inshallah, we'll do that next week.
Inshallah. And brilliant. Thank you, Shahid, for having me.
Thank you very much, Arbaz. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa assalam.